oyambadde akakofiira ka nuupu aka people power gogamba Kabaka ajjanjabwe oli mu bwiyo Kabaka Katikiro oli Kasujju Lubinga oli Namasole gwe Saabaganzi kojja wa Kabaka abakola ebyo kamba buli bati baagala Kabaka kuteekawo collision wakati w'Obwakabaka ne NUP oteekako otya akakofiira ka NUP n'ovuma Katikiro wa Buganda n'ogamba nti nja kusirika Obwakabaka ne NUP bali mu competition. Are they competing? Nze Deputy President wa NUP mu Buganda nkuleke nkutaddeko akakofiira ovume Katikiro wa Buganda nsirike nikikojogo sitegeera byabufuzi bitambula sitegeera nti ono alina kyavuga naye atwekweseemu bw'osseewo olukonko wakati Museveni musiru obutamanya nti twamugoba mu Buganda Museveni musiru obutamanya nti nina okuteekawo embeera eteekawo nti waliwo collision course wakati w'Obwakabaka ne NUP. I'm the Deputy President nali Minisita wa Kabaka ovume Katikkiro otyobole n'Abagereka nga nze Myuka Kyagulanyi nsirike ngambe nti amanyi abawagizi baffe nnyo omanyi. No, I can't do that. Mbambi trains a cause ey'okukumaakuma abantu ba Buganda batambule naffe.
Ebintu bingi bye mutya saagala mutye eggwanga ne lijja kukyuka.
To refocus the nation to what is going to happen after. Inevitably, the regime will pack up and go. But it's our job to express our readiness to lead. So, Mr. President, my impressions I'm going to share with you this morning are impressions of a group ready to lead, not just to impress. We are just saying, please give us a chance. We are actually ready. The Honorable Jole Mugisha is the Deputy President of NUP in charge of Western Uganda. She was not recognized. You are most welcome. A very senior citizen. And the array of our invitations was intentioned to draw the attention of the nation to our work and why we believe the country is missing us. At the end of the day today, Ugandans will know what they are missing. They probably don't know what they are missing. And I want to thank you, my President, for the team you gave me to work with in Parliament, my Chief Whip, the Shadow Ministers, and the reflections here are a collective effort of this team. We took off time, our schedules, to carry through these ideas, and they were collectively put together from the different political shades. They are not simply the wiseacring of NUP, let alone its leaders. They are an impression from different shades of opinion. We canvassed over, and we thought we can make a difference. And as the moderator informed this meeting that the theme of our budget is rethinking the government budget and a human resource approach to budgeting or resource allocation. We are aware that over the last 3 years, government moved away from a sectoral approach to what they call the program approach to budgeting. I want you to ambush any government minister in the corridors of Parliament. Tell them to come here. We give them 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and a box of water to speak about the budget approach to budgeting, the program approach to budgeting. They'll end up in the loo, I'm very sure. So we are a nation scattered. People in government are occupying space. These honorable members will tell you their interaction with ministers, unable to explain what they are doing, that they are pretending over government. The migration from the sectoral approach to program approach was never properly conceptualized. Eventually, it's a huge paper tiger incapable of translation into action. That's why they will tell you, we have not paid salary, but we budgeted for salary. We have increased the pay for science teachers. But if you're a head teacher and you're a science head teacher, you was not increased, you're a head teacher, but not a teacher. Hogwash. Then you ask, what happened to the planning function of government? So this morning, ladies and gentlemen, we are sauntering into the afternoon slowly. We want to share with the world, the distinguished guests, our impressions of where we are and where we want to go. And because the Shadow Minister has enabled me to shed a light on the key impressions, I will work very fast. I'll ask the gentleman on the projector to begin the projections, right where they are. I explained earlier on that the objective for a human rights-based approach to budgeting is because there's a reason why citizens demand for a government. A government is not just an impression. A government must be one for a purpose. And the entire scope of reason for having a government is enshrined in the band of rights that we must, as of necessity and as of right, as birthright, enjoy. Chapter 4 of our Constitution clearly underscores the extent of rights. And if you look at this huge booklet here that enshrines our ideas, we have bundled these programs, these ideas into 4. Initially, civic and political rights, and the entities therein are well structured. Then economic rights, and then lastly, social and cultural rights. We don't have 20 programs to deliver nothing. We have that 3 bundle of rights, civic and political, economic, then social, cultural rights. We believe if we underscore and resource those bundles of rights, we would be home and dry. The reason why governments are governments is because they are sensitive to the needs of their people. And all the services governments provide are done so as a matter of right. And governments must ensure that the obligation to availability of resources, accessibility to resources in their adequate quantities, and reducing the extent of inequalities by purposing resources to reduce inequities and inequalities, and of course, that all that they do in terms of programming is done to ensure that human rights are observed. Basically, the right to education, the right to safe water, the right to health, the right to a job. These are not acts of magnanimity by a government. They are a matter of right, and therefore, our budget programming is meant to deliver that. Can we continue? So in doing this, like the Shadow Minister for Finance observed, the government must be transparent. The government must enhance participation of citizenry. The government must be accountable and must not discriminate. Have you had government ministers telling citizens that you voted wrongly, you not benefit from government services? And they continue to claim to be a government? That must be a kobo, not a government. Continue. So we believe that once you observe these rights and you know that citizens make us leaders to observe those rights, then you are able to deliver. Let me give in the next 5 minutes where we are in terms of economic outlook. The first is about inflation and domestic prices. We know for a fact that inflation in Uganda is double-digit for the last more than 2 years. And the double-digit inflation is partly because we are unable to fathom how to deal with it. This room bears a number of economists. And one of the shocks in Uganda is that the government is trying to deal with inflation, but they have never informed the country which type of inflation they are dealing with. We contend that the country is facing structural inflation. And if you are facing structural inflation, you do not invoke the kind of policies the government invoked to deal with it, namely a contractionally monetary policy that is reducing money in circulation, but two, an expansionary fiscal policy, meaning collecting more money from the public. The people are broke. The kind of inflation we are facing is not because there is a lot of money in people's hands chasing too few goods. Basic economics. That's the first subtopic in inflation. So you are facing structural inflation, you are deploying a contractionally fiscal policy, monetary policy, meaning that you believe that people have a lot of money in their pockets, when actually they are broke. So eventually, we are failing to deal with this inflation, and it remains double-digit for more than 24 months. We contend that the bulk of our inflation is imported because we are net importers of petroleum products, and the petroleum import bill is the biggest. The second is the steel import bill, iron and steel. Continue down. So we must deal with this inflation holistically. One, by enhancing production, because structural inflation impedes production. We must deal with those issues that impair and disable production in the economy. It's not because people have a lot of money in their pockets. Relatedly, are interest rates. Because you have inflation, interest rates as of necessity are high in our banks. Commercial banks hedge inflation by hiking interest rates. So what do? Because already you are facing structural inflation and interest rates are very high, the producers are disabled from borrowing. So you continue in a situation of inability to produce, to secure jobs. So you end up with inflation and unemployment, which the economists call stagflation. That's where we are. So in every bank, commercial banks will look at the rate of inflation and they'll determine the rate charged on loans. So in a very dire economic situation, continue down. Can we move? Look at our external account. We are in $284 million in terms of BOP disequilibrium with Asia. Asia is our biggest trading partner, Asian, because of necessarily China, India, they account for this. So between what we sell there and what we get there, that's our deficit on the BOP account. Continue. The Middle East, $106 million. Between what we sell and what we get, that's the deficit. And of course, the rest of the world. Continue down first. So, what is it that is strange with our BOP account? Now, when you are facing a BOP disequilibrium, you don't need a PhD in economics to know that you must distinguish between short-term problems that require reforms, adjustment, just tweaking a few things. You're unable to export. What do? Tweak a few things on your BOP account and you export more. If you're facing long-term disequilibrium, make reforms. So we neither have reforms nor adjustments. So the BOP account over the next 12 months is going to remain in that bleak picture. We have a problem in Kenya. Over the last 2 days in Parliament, the government has been struggling to explain how to approach it. We are asking them, so if Kenya boils up, what is the remedy for Uganda? They are saying they're in charge, as if they're in charge of Uganda and Kenya. Now, if you have a crisis, our external reserves can only hold us for 3.6 months. A basic economy requires at least 6 months of import capacity in a crisis. We can only survive for 3.5 months in our situation. That's our economy. Scroll down. So we have talked about that. Continue down. The major causes of the BOP account is scribblia. And our solution going forward, if we're government, of course, we have a lot of resources, abused resources. One of them is iron ore that we have in Southwestern Uganda. I know the government banned the export of raw iron ore. But I'm also aware that some people, some super Ugandans are exporting slowly the raw material. The iron ore in Southwestern Uganda is capable of sustaining not only East Africa, but the rest of East and Central Africa without importing from China. You would have curtailed and cut off the import bill of iron ore, steel, and aluminum products by exploiting the iron ore in Western Uganda. There's so much money we have spent trying to exploit oil. If we had to put that into that industry, it would be miles ahead. I don't think our planners here have gone to sleep. I am aware somebody from NPA is here. I'm also aware that people at NPA are doing their best. But in economics, we talk about planning without plans, and plans without planning. I don't know which of these two these people are implementing. Continue. We also believe, of course, most of you probably in a while you interact with the dollar. That is the extent of our exchange rates. And the reason is very simple. If you're a net importer, you're not exporting, that's what is bound to happen with the exchange rate. Secondly, you have a lot of hemorrhage in terms of capital flight. You're losing a lot of dollars through capital flight. That's why you are in terms of the exchange rate. So you are not competitive in terms of exports. So eventually, over the last 12 months, the shilling has been battered by 3.1% and is still depreciating. Continue. The fiscal deficit. I thought the shadow minister was talking about the fiscal deficit, but didn't talk about it. But the difference between what you locally mobilize and what you intend to use locally. We're talking about local revenue mobilization. Our fiscal deficit is at 5.4%. And the reasons have been ably given because, continue down, it's that big because we exempt people from paying taxes illicitly, the corruption that is endemic, and of course the inefficiencies in local revenue mobilization coupled with budget abuse, like the shadow minister has reported. When you have those abuses, definitely you're going to end up with a huge fiscal deficit. That's where we are. Continue down, and our solutions for this. Can you go to the solutions for the fiscal deficit? Okay, you go back a bit up by 2 steps because the public debt. Again. Yeah, of course, the solutions for the fiscal deficit, like I mentioned, the shadow minister ably enumerated, of our anti-corruption approach to revenue mobilization and tax exemptions that we consider illicit, and of course enhancing domestic revenue mobilization as a solution. Budget abuse in this country, if you're a member of parliament and you have not figured out how the budget is abused, then you're in a wrong place. And it's abused largely because partly our oversight is weak, and of course an overbearing ruling party in parliament, making it very improbable for members of parliament to exert enough pressure on the regime to be disciplined. And certainly, it's the DNA of the sitting government to abuse public funds. How do you anistate a DNA? I'm not a scientist. Probably I will ask Dr. Batua if they can change one's DNA. But the corruption DNA is permanent. You can only, yeah, the good doctor from Congress says it's a chromosome, so I don't know who can change the DNA of this government when it comes to corruption. Let's move down. We have talked about the public debt. I don't want to waste time on it. The finance minister has talked about it. Move down. What you need to know about the public debt currently, for every 100 shillings URA collects, 100 shillings URA collects, 37 shillings go to public debt servicing. Every 100, 37 is on debt. Lw'okunganya ekikumi, asatu musanvu bakola ki? Bazibanja, baziryawo. That's how dire our situation is. That's the 37%. So the public debt exerts 37% pressure on every inch of local revenue mobilized. That's how dire. Let's move a bit faster. The trend lines of the debt, I don't have to go over them. The causes have enumerated. Move down. Of course, the solutions, in our 6 months as a government, we want to cause an audit into all forms of borrowing. Some borrowing is illicit. Some borrowing is fictitious. Some borrowing is not declared. So we must audit. You borrowed for what? Was it authorized? And some of the borrowing is unauthorized. You are aware, I've risen on the floor of Parliament several times to question a new mechanism called pre-financing, or financing, especially public roads, infrastructure. The government meets with a contractor, a Chinese or Indian or whatever, and say, I want you to go and construct Masaka-Kampala Highway. Name your price. That borrowing is not brought to Parliament, but it's a form of borrowing without parliamentary approval, which is unconstitutional and illegal ab initio. So we need to audit some of this borrowing. Remember, those contracts sometimes are 10 times overpriced. That's why they need to be audited. And I want to encourage my sister, the IGG, to interest yourself in a pre-financing contracts. Compare them with other forms of contracts to get to understand how this taxpayer is being fleeced in this country. Pre-financing contracts. Of course, the finance minister talked about rolling back on domestic borrowing, which is a huge problem that clouds out domestic investments. We talked about that already. Move down. The banking sector, in that booklet is well enumerated, it's foreign dominated. Because the banking sector is crowded by foreign-owned banks, capital flight is 100%. At the end of the day, the local banks are being squeezed out of business. And part of the reason and part of our solution, Bank of Uganda has by law mandated to determine the minimum capital requirement opening a bank. And apparently now, at a serious 25 billion, how many local people can open a bank? That's why they're encouraging you to go into circles, NIGIN and the like. One of our solutions is we shall tinker with the law to at least create two parallel systems for locally owned bank and foreign owned banks. We believe that can help local people to ease on the restrictive capital requirements for starting local banks. I heard General Museveni sometimes say that it was a mistake to sell UCB. Was UCB sold or just shared? For his troubles, we would have our own government-owned commercial bank for the purpose of enabling local people to access credit from their own. Our neighbors, Kenya, have, I think, 4 banks here. all we have in other countries, we export trouble to other countries, not business. I've only had Centenary Bank starting a branch in Malawi. We wish them luck. Which other export do we have for the region? Trouble. We shall restart a Ugandan-owned bank, government bank. All governments have banks. Move down. Corruption. Just scroll slowly as I talk about corruption. I think corruption in this country can cause you nausea. And I think those who write about it have run out of pages. If you have the booklet, you have write into the side of your book or on the cover. The cases are innumerable. Move down a bit. In 2021, that's how much we lost in corruption, 10 trillion. The forms of corruption are well enumerated in this huge booklet. You read them, move a bit down. And the way money is siphoned under declaration of taxes, under declaration of utility user fees, absenteeism from work, inflated payroll, ghost service consumers like ghost students and teachers, and also we have now ghost health workers. Parliament last year voted the money for a health center that does not exist. Remember, just imagine a health center given the money and does not exist. So corruption has now gotten new faces. I'm afraid your goose is cooked. That's the outlook. You are aware, I'm sure, of this information that GTI carried out a study in 2021 and declared 15.1 trillion lost in runaway corruption. And those are some of the cases. Salaries, inventory resources, payroll corruption, judicial corruption, procurement corruption, security, education. You see, whenever you see the education minister in the parliament, and what you get is that he's very busy planning for the country, but see corruption in her ministry. Not in the parliament, not looking for the corrupt. So what's happening? That's the array. Move down. So the cost to the taxpayer, of course, in terms of the budget, in terms of the cost to services that would have gotten to the taxpayer, and of course the indirect costs. When people look wary about so many things and they give up on government and they give up on leadership, it's partly because they're exhausted of complaining about corruption. It's very dangerous. It's our duty as leaders to motivate people not to give up on the corrupt. Proceed. I don't think I need to go over one by one some of the key corruption scandals from 1985 to 2012, but go down, because I believe that's where it started from. Yes, there. In 1985, some people robbed the Kabaka currency center of 400 million. I think that was the beginning of the corruption we see. Yes. So 1985, a bank was robbed, and the robbers eventually declared themselves who they were, and they are around posing as leaders. Then you wonder why we are where we are in terms of corruption. They were never arrested. They have given us offsprings, and their DNA is still the same. The DNA of 1985 is what we are carrying through in terms of corruption. So arrest those thieves, you do away with the corruption in this country. Continue down. Of course, the solutions, Honorable Betty Kamia, share with us. We shall cause a national reparation commission And this commission, it will be a kind of amnesty. You have been named in 1,000 corruption scandals. Please report to this office and return to the taxpayer. We have given you 6 months to return. The corrupt they are named and known. Auditor General's reports, IGG's reports, we shall give them amnesty. Just like we have amnesty commission for rebels and other people. So, amnesty for the corrupt for 6 months. Come and return to the taxpayer or you get you prosecuted. Secondly, e-government. Resident eminently in procurement. People in local government and other places know how procurement is a permanent resident of the corrupt. So when you start e-government, it's a big solution. It's more transparent. It's one way. But when you go down to scrutinize our sector of ICT, ICT is expensive and inaccessible. So you must move the two for you to be able to do away with corruption using e-government. Of course, we like the mandatory lifestyle audit, over which the Honorable Betty Kamya was stopped in her tracks. I hope you are pursuing it. Don't give up, please, on that lifestyle audit. One of my friends did ask me and tell him that, I think our children one day will ask us where we are when people are building arcades in the Kampala and other places. Because we have nothing. All we carry with us are our suits and our integrity. That will be their bequest. There are people whom we don't know what they do, and they are very wealthy. Even their children don't know what they do. Are they virtual investors in space? And they even indicate that they are rich. If you tell me you are wealthy, you answer 2 questions. How much tax do you pay? How many people do you employ? 2 things. So, Madam Igigi, that's the job. We also intend to introduce performance-based contracts. Because sometimes inertia builds because people believe they are eternal. If you're a non-performer, please, you sign out. It's one way of motivating people to work and terminate people who are inept and unable to perform. Faster, I want to go to the beef. Now, on our budget strategy, because I was giving you an outlook of where we are, and don't get frustrated. That's what we are, that's where we are. Thankfully, we are alive, and we bear ideas that we believe can uplift the citizenry from their current frustration to rethinking that this country can be rethought through. Our belief is that the kind of planning is problematic, it's lacking in imagination, discriminatory, and unable to fathom the needs of our people, and therefore the sense of misdirecting and the desire to repurpose national resources. Our budget takes a humanist approach, like I said, and we did a 3-sum cluster: civil and political rights, economic rights, and social and cultural rights. Move down. That's an array of sectors. Our fiscal framework was well laid down by the Minister of Finance. I don't want to go through it. The fiscal framework was well laid down. Our resource envelope was properly laid down. Yeah, let's go to the sectors. Yes, finance and planning is going to deal with high levels of inflation at 10.4% and rising. Deal with the weakening shilling in due course. Deal with the interest rates that are usurious, and deal with a discribria on our BOP account. That's our total debt. I think the minister talked about it. Move down. And our key priorities that the Chancellor of the Exchequer would look at is to reduce and avoid supplementary budgets and budget cuts. Reduce expedient-based military expenditure. We really believe that our expenditure on the military is partly expedient and not necessary. We're just being adventurous. What are we doing in Central Africa when our people are dying in Karamoja? That's blind expediency and expending so much money. Reduce government revenue loss, raise more tax revenue. We intend to amend Rule 159 to allow scrutiny of tax laws, restrict borrowing, and of course, like the minister advised, the threshold of 50% or even below, as our development partners in the IBRD do advise. Get down. Now let's go to the other economic sectors. Agriculture employing more than 70% of our population. Let's move. The situation in agriculture, as we know it, is stunted growth, stagnated. It's not contributing to GDP they could have desired because of its nature and structure. Smallholder farmers are hand to mouth. There's no risk taking because it's not business, it's hand to mouth. And of course, overutilization of emerging resources, dependence on nature, in other words. What are our priorities? Increase access to affordable agricultural credit, curb the effects of climate change through irrigation. Somebody talked about the PDM, which died a stillbirth. If you read our big book, we intend to scrap it immediately. It's nonsense. Scrap it, take that money into irrigation, and support farmers throughout there. If you went to Masaka, for example, and made an interaction with the farmers, they'll actually tell you their problem. They'll tell you, give us water. In another area, they'll tell you, give us the roads. So the PDM is one size fits all. Okay? Doesn't matter. Like the famous EPDF uniforms that were very small, like children uniforms. So the PDM, stillbirth. So we said we would scrap it and repurpose that resource into irrigation. Increase access to farm inputs and disease control. Of course, in the component of inputs, in the document you will see one of our activities, one of our steps is what Dr. Bedwanika has already done. His bill, I think, is out for printing, the farming contract bill. It enumerates what we need to do in making sure that farmers access inputs of quality. There is duty to those who supply inputs. Just imagine a farmer going to a shop, buys seeds, they never germinate, and it ends that way. So we are moving, we have a bill in the offing, and we believe that by the end of this session of Parliament, the famous Dr. Bedwanika bill will see the light of day as part of our positive steps into that direction. The rest are mundane, and we know them. Move down a bit. And of course, in doing that, we have allocated that much. That is in trillion, not billion. But the computer man prefers to say 1,488 billion, which is 1.4 trillion. Move down. Education and sports. Low completion rates, that's the situation. Poor retention, we all know the dropouts. Low staff levels, low capitation grant. Are you aware that our capitation grant in primary education and secondary is the lowest in the region, with the regional laggards that far? And we are proud of the dropouts. Hey, just get a bit up. You saw last year how many children had enrolled in primary 1 and how many completed primary 7. Less than 40%. Over 60% dropped out. What happened? Low staffing levels. We have been investigating with the Ministry of Education a number of schools around Kampala. A single class with 400 pupils and 3 teachers. My speaker for Kampala, you need to be interested. A school, a single class with 400 pupils and 3 teachers. And you have a Minister of Education and a Department of Planning in Education. So these are the issues we must deal with if you're going to really be serious and be relevant to our people. Proceed down. So what we intend to do is to restore the component of inspection. In our times, a school inspector was as good as a minister. What happened? So you pick vagabonds, drunkards, and regime supporters and make them inspectors to go and pick money from school head teachers. You pick a school dropout and make him a school inspector because they stole a vote for you at the polling station. So recruitment, training, repurposing, and enumeration for inspectorate. Then you'll be able to deal with the issues of dropouts, the issue of non-attendance to our pupils in school and students in school. Review secondary level curriculum. Today, the 31st of March 2023, the senior 3 students have not yet gotten first term curriculum material as I speak. Question is, are they going to extend the term? Are they going to make a refund to parents? Are they going to make the pupils study in the holiday or at home? They are not study materials. And you have a government and a government minister getting a salary. Of course, we have talked about teacher welfare. The teachers are the most abused civil servants. They are abused for being what they are. There's no educational system anywhere better than the quality of the teachers. You undermine teachers, you have killed education. Where do they get the belief that science teachers must be motivated at the expense of us teachers? I posed the question to one of the regime officials, whether music is an art or a science. Is music an art? You see? Mr. President, is music an art or a science? It's both. Are you aware that, for example, the Pythagorean theorem came from music? Are you aware of that? Including the bulldozer in mathematics. The composers of the same are initially musicians. So, you are for science teachers, the art teachers should go and suffer, go and hang. Our policy is dual motivation. We shall motivate all the teachers. So now that you have increased the pay for science teachers in government schools, so what happens to science teachers in private schools? So where do the private schools get money to match government pay? So they should go and hang. Our approach is, because science teachers are rare and few, our government would second science teachers to private schools. Recruit all science teachers available, second them to private schools, because we have more private schools than government schools. Common sense. You don't have to have a PhD in common sense to know that private teachers will not afford the cost of, private schools don't afford the cost of science teachers at that rate. So we would repurpose resources to education to recruit any mass available science teachers and send them to private schools. You can do that. It's done elsewhere. We're talking about the school feeding program. So we are proud to send thousands of our children to school to starve the whole day. So we raise RDCs, DSOs, and all manner of vagabonds to go and see whoever is demanding for some little money for food for children. Because you want to be populist. We would repurpose resources to make sure our children are fed at school. This country is not devoid of enough food. It's abused resources and an abused people. The Honorable Minister for Sports made a very elaborate presentation on sports, the Honorable Kayemba, about our impressions on sports. Sports is not entertaining per se. Sports in our time is big time business. How much money has been spent on sports infrastructure over the last 10 years? A big zero. So we would have resources devoted for sports in all regions because it's a big business. You are a country, 75% of young people, you would really encourage to go into sports as a business, as an investment, but they don't have sports facilities. In Kampala, school sports facilities were sold to thieves in Kampala. You know, so what do you do? Of course, as part of our recovery of government assets, we would recover all those assets. If you put there an arcade and we have a school, that arcade will become a playground in our government. Make no mistake. As part of recovering the country and stopping the nonsense that has been visited on this country for these years. Move down. So who would vote that much to make sure we repurpose that much to recover the education sector? Move down. Gender, labor and social development. The cause of our labor workforce is low productivity. Their rights are abused. They are less motivated. We have, do you know that in this country, graduate unemployment is at 85%? 85% graduate unemployment. That's for World Cup. Inadequate management, insufficient coverage of social protection. Move down. That's the situation analysis. Of course, we've been dealing with a huge problem of labor externalization. And because this market of labor externalization is now occupied by a mafia clique, we would re-regulate it to make sure, like other nations are doing, would restructure it, regulate it, and repurpose its functioning. The Minister for Youth talked about youth-friendly interventions in the communities. Our youth are sensitive. Our youth needs to be understood. Our youth needs to be redirected. Their efforts and their energy needs to be recultured. And that's why we need numerous youth centers to deal with their challenges because they are unique and refunction them into the objectives of development for our country. Of course, you need to have regional remand homes. Why are the children coming from Karamoja taken to Kampiringisa or any other place? Why not in an environment of their culture so that they can really grow as children? The arts industry is a huge industry. We need to revamp it. And that line, the Honorable Hilary Chiaga, Dr. Hildeman, is leading us in reviewing the law that relates to this industry. The copyright and neighboring rights law is under review, courtesy of his effort. We want to thank him. And part of the reason is to repurpose that law so that it can serve so many young people. So many people who are really talented that they can benefit from their talent. Move down, the rest time Yonden. the zero is supposed to be this side, 660 billion, not 66. You have to change that. You cannot do what I've said with 66 billion. It's 660 billion. Move down to the next sector. Health. Dr. Batua is a very, very imaginative Minister of Health. His sector is, as underlined, significantly underfunded. We have a resurgence of malaria in our communities. Road carnage is eating away into the resource. Teenage pregnancies are becoming a mainstay. We need to change all this. One of the more elaborate issues in this booklet is how we intend to deal with the malaria. If, for example, if we lose 2 people because of Ebola in 1 week, we close the country. But we lose more than 50 people every day of malaria. But you are happy to return home without a clear policy to eradicate malaria. So we have elaborated clearly how we need to deal with this by repurposing resources into more sophisticated spraying. It's been done elsewhere. If you gave my Minister of Health 10 minutes to explain that, you will go really appreciating that we can actually do away with malaria in this country. The issue is we are not motivated to do that. We can do it. Human resource. Are you aware, comrades, that in this country, not even a half of the available medical doctors are employed by government? Not even a half. Probably a quarter are employed. This country has about 5,000 trained medical doctors. Only 1,300 are employed by government. So we would employ more doctors because we need them. And part of the desire to recruit more doctors is that we would also second them to non-government health facilities, like the religious-based and non-profit. Because we have more of them than government health centers. And our point of service delivery will be the health center 4. And the Hon Mpuuga last financial year gave us the figures of how much money we would need to have health center 4 in every constituency. And that money is very small, just 300 million. You will have at least a working health center 4 in every constituency. Where's the money? It is somewhere in expediency. So who would grow out of recruitment? There are well-trained health workers in this country that needs to be motivated to stay here. They are running away because of lack of motivation. It's our job as alternative government to promise them a new Uganda, the return and the repurpose national resources. Scroll down. So we would allocate 2.92 trillion to that sector. Remember, we are part of, you see, we love signing declarations. Maybe because we have a company that makes pens in Uganda. So every declaration we sign, we just sign, no matter. So we are signatories to the Abuja Declaration that requires us to at least commit 15% of the national budget on health. The last time I checked, we are below 8. And regionally, we are also a regional laggard in terms of putting resources on health. Our allocation will give us closer to 10% of the budget. And if you give us 5 years in the government, we would really hit the 15% of commitment as per the Abuja Declaration. Move down. So after 40 years of the NRM government, we are still below 8%. And be sure if you gave them another year, we would go about 5%. Because they're not doing any better, they're worsening every day. Lands and housing. My shadow minister for lands, I think, is taken a journey, lost a family member when he's around. But he has very interesting suggestions in this area to deal with the land problem. We have heard about land grabbing and evictions. Land is not simply an economic issue, it's a political issue for control of citizens. That's why those that are grabbing people's land are armed. They're not ordinary people. An ordinary person in Ambisha cannot go to Bugishu and evict people from their land. It is the armed thugs in the government because they want to control citizens. So land is a serious political matter. We would deal with it. The situation of land grabbing, encroachment on public land. Those of you in local governments know so well how much illegal encroachment has been visited on public land. Of course, fraud and corruption and unorganized urbanization. That's why you're going to find somebody building in a road reserve, but they have their plans approved. So is government in a holiday? No, they are part of the problem. Our priorities is strengthen the land tenure security, audit the land fund. It's one of the pending motions from our side, even now, is auditing the land fund. Remember, the land fund was meant to benefit the poor that are on other people's land, but want to really secure their security of tenure. But we are aware that part of the land fund was used by the smart people to buy plots in Kololo. So how do you go to the land fund to go and buy a plot in Bukoto? So this information is available. Probably the IGIG should also interest herself in the land fund and how it's been utilized over the years. That people can actually afford to buy land, went for the land fund to acquire land on Kampala Road and other places, Bukulobi and other places. Not in Bunyoro, not anywhere where people actually need this money. Not in Buganda where people are being evicted from their vivanja and they cannot really buy out themselves. Audit public land transactions. Yes, public land transactions. People have really partaken of public land. My sister Santa knows what's happening to public farms in the north, in Acholi, that are being parceled out by the smart people, smart in quotes. Of course, review and implement the National Physical Development Plan. How do you address the housing deficit in this country? If you're a government, you can have an elaborate plan. What do you do to the Chivuli slums? What do you do to the slums in Namuongo? What do you do to the slums in all these places? In Kamocha, not where my president has office, but around the president's place. There are several, But a purposeful government can deal with this problem. Create more housing, affordable housing for citizens, and still have enough housing for government, if you're a serious government. Continue. So we would vote to revamp that sector that much. Proceed. Tourism. Yeah, this is the situation in tourism. The situation is low tourist turn up, low ranking, low quality yet expensive accommodation, poor infrastructure, poor marketing. I had somebody complain that you see our gorillas are being fed with bananas from Rwanda and they are taking them. So must we forgive you? Should we sympathize with you when you are complaining about that and you're a government? So what happens to marketing? Can you market Uganda while you're tear gassing citizens of Uganda? You want to market tourism while you're killing your citizens? You're marketing tourism while you're abducting your own citizens, and you think people are going to come and see gorillas while you're abducting citizens. It's a very funny mix. How do you really justify tourism in an environment of repression? I am not aware how many of you would take a ticket to go and tour Afghanistan, as an example. Because we love tourism, so you want to go or to Ukraine as part of your adventure. That's what it takes to attract tourists. How much money are we putting in?
mwechine nyamiza nomtwene guma